I remember driving 4 hours to my family cabin, the place my grandfather Elwood Castor had built with his own two hands. It wasn't just a cabin, it was a piece of our family history, something my son was supposed to grow up with just like I did. But when I arrived there, it was a sold sign staked in my front yard. Not a for sale sign, a sold sign on property I never listed, never agreed to sell, and didn't even know was on the market. And standing next to it, arms crossed, was the HOA president, Renata Voss. She wore a blazer that probably cost more than my truck payment. Her smile sickeningly sweet, as if she had just won a prize. Turns out she had been quietly maneuvering to hand over my grandfather's property to her brother-in-law's development company for the better part of 8 months. I didn't yell, didn't cry. I walked to my truck, pulled out my phone, and started recording. This is the story of how a corrupt HOA tried to steal a dead man's legacy, and how I made sure the entire county saw them fail. What would you do if you came home to a sold sign on property you never listed? Let me know in the comments. My grandfather wasn't rich by any stretch. He was a pipe fitter from western Montana, working tough jobs in the cold for over 3 decades. But in 1967, he bought 11 acres on the eastern slope of a ridge just outside Delhart, Montana. The town had about 2,400 people, 2 stoplights, and 1 diner that served the best pie in town. The winters were harsh, the kind that tested your character, and the summers were brief, but it was home. Elwood built the cabin himself. 2 summers of hard work framing it, chinking the logs, hauling propane tanks up the ridge, and making it his own. The place smelled of pine sap and wood smoke. The floorboards creaked when you walked in, but it was comforting, like the house was alive, welcoming you. My dad grew up coming to this cabin. I grew up here, and my son caught his first trout in the creek behind it. When Elwood died in 2019, the cabin passed to me through a will that was properly filed and probated without a hitch. Everything was in order, the deed was clean, the property taxes were paid. But here's the thing, about 15 years ago, our land got absorbed into a loosely managed homeowners association called the Ridgerest Cabin Community, RCC. No one in my family signed anything. Elwood just paid the $240 yearly dues and got a newsletter in return. There were no rules, no restrictions, just dues. That worked for us for decades. But then things changed. About 14 months before I found that sold sign in my yard, the RCC elected a new president, Renata Voss. She had moved here from Scottsdale, Arizona, bringing all the arrogance of someone who's used to being the most important person in every room. She had sharp eyes and sharper elbows. Her husband worked in real estate, and her brother-in-law, Boyd Voss, ran Ridgeline Acquisition Partners, a company that would later play a key role in this story. From the start, Renata acted like a woman who had been waiting for her chance to push someone around. She rewrote the dues structure and started issuing fines for things like the way I stacked firewood. Yes, firewood. And then the first letter arrived. She claimed I was violating a covenant I had never even heard of. Turns out I had missed a 2021 meeting, but she never sent me the minutes. It didn't take long to figure out that Renata wasn't after compliance. She was after leverage. And somewhere between that first letter and the morning I found the sold sign in my yard, she decided my grandfather's cabin was a property she could quietly redirect to her brother-in-law's company. The fines came in each more ridiculous than the last. $50 for a trailer I had parked next to the cabin while doing roof repairs. $75 for exterior lighting that wasn't the right color temperature. I had no idea that porch lights even had color temperatures until Renata made sure I learned. I ignored the first 2, but then came the third one with a note threatening to place a lien on the property if I didn't pay. Now, I want you to know something important here. In many states, an HOA can place a lien on your property for unpaid fines. And if those liens go unpaid long enough, they can initiate foreclosure proceedings even if you've owned the property outright. I paid those fines under protest, writing paid under protest on the checks and keeping a record. I called a property attorney, Cordell Waverly, and after reviewing the case, he told me that the fines were based on an invalid amendment. It was all a scam. The fines, the forced violations, the entire narrative Renata had created, it was fraudulent. And that's when the plan began to take shape. We started documenting everything, every envelope, every letter, and every fine. And when I drove up to the cabin that weekend, I discovered someone had spray-painted violation across my front gate. My son and I documented everything. We even took pictures of the tire tracks and the soft mud near the gate. It wasn't just a fine anymore. It was vandalism. I filed a report with the sheriff's department, and Deputy Briggs, a quiet man who'd been dealing with HOA complaints for years, gave me useful information. The RCC had more complaints in the past 14 months than in the previous 12 years combined. But there was one more twist. Montana law made it clear that HOA membership could be voluntary. So I sent a resignation letter effective, immediately stating that I no longer wished to be a part of the RCC. The moment I resigned, they lost all authority over me. That was the moment everything changed. Renata escalated things, though, sending me even more fines, but we were ready. Cordell had me keep every piece of mail, and the next time I went up to the cabin, I took pictures of the property's condition. That's when Boyd Voss showed up. He had a smooth-talking pitch about buying the property, which I recorded. Afterward, I found out that Boyd's company was a partner with the RCC's treasurer, who had been funneling member dues into her own business. It was all connected, a coordinated scheme to pressure me and other owners into selling their properties at below market value, all while lining the pockets of Renata and Boyd. I called in a forensic accountant, and she uncovered even more financial irregularities, unauthorized wire transfers, fraudulent business dealings, the works. At that point, it was clear I had to go public. I contacted the Montana Department of Justice, filed a formal complaint, and prepared for a showdown. When the day came, it wasn't just me standing up against them. It was a community. People I didn't even know stood with me, sharing their own stories of abuse by the RCC. Renata tried to discredit me, but the evidence was irrefutable. Her attempts to stop me only made the case stronger. At the board meeting, I laid out everything: the wire transfers, the fraudulent sale, and the recording of Boyd Voss trying to make a deal behind my back. The room went silent. It was over for Renata. In the end, she resigned, and Boyd's purchase agreement was voided. The investigation resulted in a civil action, and the entire RCC board was overhauled. The fines I had paid under protest were refunded, and the community began to heal. But there was one more thing. A new fund was established in my grandfather's name, dedicated to land conservation and supporting young people pursuing careers in environmental science. My grandfather never went to college, but I think he would have been proud to have his name on something that helps others learn. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But in the end, it was worth it. Because when you stand up against corruption, you don't just fight for yourself. You fight for everyone who's been silenced. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to document everything. And don't be alone in the fight. When you stop being isolated and start questioning things openly, you expose the cracks in systems that rely on silence. Always stand up for what's right, because when you do, you can make a difference. If you've ever dealt with an HOA, dropped a fine that made no sense, or had a neighbor with too much power, drop a comment. Let's talk about it. Share your experiences, and don't forget to subscribe if you believe in the power of standing up against the wrongs in your community.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.